Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we need to discuss something that's been unfolding rapidly over the last several days. And honestly, the more you dig into it, the more intriguing and complex it becomes. We're talking about Melania Trump's legal team and their most recent action against Michael Wolff, and specifically against the GoFundMe campaign that's been established to help him defend against this lawsuit. And when I tell you this story has depth, I mean it truly has depth that extends far beyond just a straightforward legal conflict. So, let me paint the picture for those of you who might be getting up to speed. Michael Wolff is the journalist and author who's been in Melania's sights for quite some time now. And as many of you are aware from earlier videos, this entire legal confrontation originates from his book, and specifically from assertions he made concerning Jeffrey Epstein, and certain accusations that Melania's legal team claims are defamatory. Now, we've discussed the fundamentals of that lawsuit previously, so I'm not going to revisit every single element of the initial filing, but what's transpired since then is definitely worth examining because it brings up some genuinely significant questions about power, access to justice, and who gets to push back when they're sued by someone with practically unlimited resources. Here's what's developing. Melania Trump's attorneys have now filed motions challenging the GoFundMe campaign that was established to help Michael Wolff cover his legal defense costs. And this GoFundMe campaign, let me tell you, it's been remarkably successful. People from across the country, across the world actually, have donated to help Wolff battle this case. The fund has accumulated over $800,000. That's not an insignificant amount of money. But when you're confronting a legal challenge from a former First Lady who can afford to retain literally the finest lawyers money can buy, $800,000 might just be what you need to balance the scales even slightly. The reaction to this fundraiser has been extraordinary, and I think that reveals something significant about how people perceive this case. They see a journalist, a writer, someone who earns a living by investigating and writing about powerful people being sued by one of the most powerful families in America. And regular people, everyday citizens who believe in press freedom and the right to speak truth to power, they've opened their wallets to support him. That's extraordinary. That's people declaring, we think this is important, we think journalism is important, and we're willing to put our money where our convictions are. But now Melania's legal team's targeting that support. They're contending that this GoFundMe campaign is fundamentally a publicity stunt. They're asserting that Wolff is exploiting this lawsuit to enrich himself, to gain attention, to transform what should be a straightforward defamation case into some sort of media spectacle. And they want the court to take action about it. They want restrictions placed on how Wolff can raise money for his defence, or they want the existence of this campaign to be used against him in court somehow, to characterise him as someone who's not a legitimate defendant, but rather someone who's manipulating the situation. Let me be absolutely clear about something here. Michael Wolff is not retreating. He's not apologising. He's not displaying any indication of being intimidated by these new filings. His response, both through his attorneys and in public statements, has been essentially this: I have every right to defend myself, and I have every right to accept assistance from people who want to support that defence. And you know what? He's completely correct about that. Consider what we're actually discussing here. On one side, you have Melania Trump, a former First Lady of the United States, married to a billionaire, someone who has access to the kind of legal firepower that most people can't even comprehend. She can retain entire teams of lawyers from the most prestigious firms in the nation. She can afford to extend this case out for years if she chooses to. She has essentially unlimited resources to pursue this lawsuit. That's simply the reality of her situation. On the other side, you have Michael Wolff. He's a successful author, certainly, but he's not a billionaire. He's a journalist and a writer. His resources are his research, his sources, his ability to write and publish. When he gets sued, he doesn't have a bottomless legal fund to access. He has to determine how he's going to pay lawyers who can adequately represent him against this kind of aggressive litigation. And so he, like many people in his position have done before him, turned to crowdfunding. He turned to the public and said, I need assistance. And the public answered. Now, Melania's lawyers are characterising that as a publicity stunt. They're implying there's something inappropriate or undignified about a defendant raising money for their legal defence through public contributions. But let's think critically about this argument for a moment. What they're genuinely saying is that Michael Wolff should simply accept that he's outgunned, that he's outmatched financially, and that he should either settle on whatever terms Melania's team demands or attempt to fight this case with inadequate legal representation. That's what happens when you can't afford skilled lawyers. You lose not because you're wrong, but because you can't afford to demonstrate you're right. This is a fundamental access to justice issue. We have a legal system that in theory is supposed to treat everyone equally. But in practice, we all recognise that's not how it functions. The person with more money can hire superior lawyers, can afford to file motion after motion, can extend cases out until the other side exhausts their resources and has to surrender. It's a war of attrition, and the side with deeper pockets almost always prevails, regardless of the actual merits of the case. So when regular people step in and say, we're going to help balance this playing field a little bit, we're going to help this person afford adequate legal representation, that's not a publicity stunt. That's democracy in action. That's people using their collective resources to help ensure that someone can actually defend themselves in court. And Michael Wolff is standing firm on this point. He's not embarrassed of the GoFundMe. He's not attempting to conceal it or minimise it. He's saying, yes, people are helping me, and I'm grateful for that help, and there's nothing improper about accepting it. And he's right. There is a long tradition in this country of people rallying around defendants they believe in, whether it's through legal defence funds, through organisations like the ACLU that take on cases pro bono, or through modern tools like crowdfunding platforms. This is how ordinary people without extraordinary wealth defend themselves against powerful adversaries. But here's where this story takes another fascinating turn. And this is something that's just emerged in recent days. New files related to Jeffrey Epstein have been released. And in those files, there's correspondence that includes Melania Trump. We're talking about emails that demonstrate a friendly relationship, communications that indicate she was more engaged in certain social circles than perhaps has been previously acknowledged. Now, these are just emails, and having friendly correspondence with someone doesn't mean you knew about their crimes or participated in anything illegal. That's important to state clearly, but it is relevant context for this lawsuit. Because remember what this lawsuit is about at its foundation. It's about Michael Wolff's book and what he wrote regarding Epstein and connections to the Trump family. Melania is suing because she says his claims are false and defamatory. But now we have these newly released files that show her email address, appearing in Epstein-related documents showing friendly communication, showing that there were connections there. And this is information that Michael Wolff can potentially utilise in his defence. If he's being sued for writing about connections between Melania and Epstein's social circle, and then documents emerge that actually corroborate that there were connections, that there was friendly communication, well, that's relevant evidence, isn't it? This is why Wolff's legal team is going to be very interested in these new Epstein files. They provide documentary evidence that can be used to support his reporting. They show that he wasn't just fabricating things or relying on unreliable sources. There's actual correspondence now in the public record. And the timing of this is significant because it comes right in the middle of this legal battle, right as Melania's team is trying to argue that Wolff is just a sensationalist who publishes lies for profit. Now, Wolff hasn't made any official statements yet about specifically how he plans to use these newly released Epstein files in his defence, but it doesn't take a legal expert to see how they could be relevant. If the lawsuit is about whether he defamed Melania by connecting her to Epstein's social circle, and then evidence emerges showing that connection existed in some form, that's going to be part of the conversation in court. It has to be. Truth is an absolute defence against defamation. If you can prove that what you wrote was true, or at least substantially true, then you can't be successfully sued for defamation. That's the law. And this brings us back to why the attack on the GoFundMe is so troubling. Melania's legal team understands that defending against a defamation lawsuit requires resources. You need to be able to conduct discovery, to gather evidence, to hire expert witnesses if necessary, to prepare comprehensive legal briefs. All of that costs money, substantial money. By attacking the fundraising effort, they're essentially trying to cut off Wolff's ability to mount an adequate defence. They're trying to make it harder for him to fight back. And that should concern anyone who cares about press freedom and the ability of journalists to hold powerful people accountable. Because let's be honest about what this looks like from the outside. It looks like a very wealthy, very powerful person using the legal system to punish someone for writing things she doesn't like. And when that person tries to get help from the public to defend himself, the response is to attack that too, to call it a publicity stunt, to try to paint it as something improper. It's a multi-pronged strategy designed to intimidate and exhaust the defendant, to make fighting back so difficult and so expensive that they eventually give up. But Michael Wolff isn't giving up. The fundraising continues, the legal defence is being prepared. And now with these new Epstein files entering the picture, the case potentially becomes even more interesting from an evidentiary standpoint. This isn't just going to be a he said, she said situation. There are documents now. There are emails. There's a paper trail. And that paper trail is going to be examined very carefully by Wolff's legal team as they prepare their defence. I think what bothers me most about the attack on the GoFundMe is the fundamental unfairness of it. Here you have someone who can afford the absolute best legal representation money can buy, and they're trying to prevent their opponent from being able to afford adequate representation. Think about what that means. It means the legal system becomes even more tilted toward the wealthy than it already is. It means that if you're rich enough, you can not only sue anyone you want, but you can also try to prevent them from being able to defend themselves effectively. That's not justice, that's just power dynamics playing out in a courtroom. And the characterization of this as a publicity stunt is particularly galling. Michael Wolff is a journalist. He's written multiple books. He's been in the public eye for years. He doesn't need this lawsuit to get publicity. If anything, this lawsuit is probably making his life significantly more complicated and stressful. Nobody wants to be sued, especially not by someone with unlimited resources who can make the legal process drag on indefinitely. The GoFundMe isn't about publicity. It's about survival. It's about being able to afford to defend yourself when you're being sued by someone who has every possible advantage over you. And the public seems to understand this. That's why over $800,000 has been raised. That's why people keep contributing. They see this for what it is, a David and Goliath story, where David needs a little help affording the stones for his slingshot. People believe in what Wolff is doing. They believe in the importance of journalists being able to write about powerful people without being bankrupted by lawsuits, and they're willing to help make that possible. The newly released Epstein files add another dimension to all of this because they show that this lawsuit isn't happening in a vacuum. There's a larger context here about Epstein's network, about who was involved in his social circle, about what people knew and when they knew it. Melania's emails showing up in these files doesn't prove any wrongdoing on her part, but it does show that there were connections, there was communication, there was interaction, and for a lawsuit that's specifically about whether a journalist defames someone by writing about those connections. Well, that's important information. Michael Wolff's position throughout all of this has been consistent. He stands by his reporting. He believes he has the right to defend himself in court, and he's grateful for the public support that's making that defence possible. He's not being intimidated by the legal pressure. He's not backing down because the person suing him is powerful and wealthy. He's fighting back, and he's doing it with the help of thousands of people who believe that this fight matters. This case is going to continue to develop, and I think we're going to see more interesting revelations as it moves forward, especially now with these Epstein files in play. The legal arguments are going to get more complex. The evidentiary battles are going to get more intense. And throughout all of it, the question of resources of who can afford to fight and who can't is going to remain central, because that's really what the attack on the GoFundMe is about. It's about resources. It's about trying to ensure that one side has every possible advantage while the other side struggles to keep up. And when you frame it that way, when you see it clearly for what it is, I think most people recognise how fundamentally unfair that is. Michael Wolff has every right to raise funds for his legal defence. The people who are contributing to that fund have every right to support a journalist they believe in. And the attempt to characterise this as a publicity stunt or something improper is really just an attempt to maintain an unequal power dynamic, where the wealthy can use the legal system to silence critics without those critics being able to adequately defend themselves. The fact that Melania Trump's a former First Lady doesn't change any of this. If anything, it makes it more important that journalists be able to write about her and her connections and her history without fear of being bankrupted by litigation. Public figures, especially those who have held positions of power and influence, need to be subject to scrutiny. That's how democracy works. That's how we hold powerful people accountable. And if that scrutiny can be shut down simply by filing expensive lawsuits that most people can't afford to defend against, then we have a serious problem. So, Michael Wolff stands firm. The GoFundMe continues to grow and the case moves forward. The newly released Epstein files add new evidence to the mix. Evidence that Wolff's legal team is surely examining very carefully right now. And despite all the pressure, despite the attacks on his fundraising, despite facing an opponent with vastly greater resources, Wolff is still fighting. He's still defending his work. He's still standing up for the principle that journalists should be able to write about powerful people without being destroyed financially for doing so. This is a story about power and accountability and access to justice. It's about whether ordinary people can help level the playing field when someone they believe in is being sued by someone with extraordinary wealth. It's about whether journalists can do their jobs without fear of being bankrupted by the people they write about. And it's about whether the legal system can be used as a weapon to silence criticism and shut down scrutiny. The answer to all of these questions matters, not just for Michael Wolff, but for every journalist, every writer, every person who might one day find themselves in the position of being sued by someone with far greater resources. If we allow the GoFundMe to be attacked as a publicity stunt, if we allow defendants to be cut off from public support, then we're saying that only the wealthy deserve adequate legal defence. And I don't think that's the kind of legal system anyone wants to live under. So that's where things stand right now. Melania's lawyers are attacking the fundraising effort. Michael Wolff is standing firm. Over $800,000 has been raised by people who believe in this fight. New Epstein files have emerged that may be very relevant to the case. And the fundamental questions about power, justice, and the ability of journalists to do their work continue to be at the heart of this whole situation. It's going to be fascinating to watch how this develops. And you can be sure I'll be following every development and bringing you updates as this story continues to unfold. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.